Yes, many people ask me questions because it's kind of an odd thing to do. People do it. Walking across Canada, it's a long distance. But people ask me recurring questions. One of them, for example, is, why are you doing it? In fact, somebody just a few minutes ago asked me, why was I doing this? Another question that people ask me quite often is, what lessons have you learned? I would have never thought why somebody would ask a question like that, but they do. And to give you an example, a few weeks ago, a Facebook friend of mine messaged me and asked, so what lesson have you learned today? And I just thought for a minute. I know the individual, so I thought about being a little bit funny, but it was actually true. I told her, I said, you know what? I found it's okay to be hit on by gay guys. That just happened. And that my life will never be the same, so in effect, I'm dead to my own life. And finally I said, another thing I realized is, if you ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different answer. Because as we all know, we all have careers and so on. If somebody asks you, as a parent, somebody's a parent in here, what lessons have you learned? Well, they could go on and on. You could think of something tomorrow again. But there are critical or large lessons, I believe, that we can take away from whatever we do. And tonight I want to share with you 3 key lessons that I've learned that seem to have recurred in my mind as I've walked along, that I've taken from this, really, especially this walk. The first one has to do with the mind and the body, and how they're interrelated. And bear in mind here, I'm not approaching this from any scientific deduction. This is simply empirical experience that I'm coming from. There seems to be a mind in the body and a mind that's not in the body. I don't know how to explain it, but they seem to be independent of one another. And the way this showed up, especially in a very strong way, was when I did an 83-kilometer walk in one 24-hour period without taking my backpack off. This happened not on purpose. It happened because of a mistake I made, basically. I was walking from Field, BC, and I ended up walking to Banff, and you can Google search that. It's about 83 kilometers. I walked up the big hill to the Continental Divide. There's a snowstorm up there. I got on to Lake Louise, 27 kilometers approximately, I believe, and I got some groceries there. Didn't have to take my pack off. Hung my groceries on the front of my pack, and was about to hike on to about another equivalent amount to an adventure hostel in the bush, about halfway between Lake Louise and Banff. I got out there, it was about 53 kilometers at that point, and I couldn't find the hostel. It didn't have a phone number. You were supposed to show up to it. It was still snowing. It was getting dark. Grizzly country. I didn't want to sleep with the grizzlies. I didn't care for it. So I saw a sign ahead that said 30 kilometers to Banff. I told myself I'm going to walk there. And I walked all the way. And it was an interesting experience because throughout the days leading up to that, the mind of the body was a constant whining, complaining individual, complaining about sore feet, complaining about the weight of the pack and so on. But when I walked this 30 kilometers, it was as though an invisible hand reached out and dialed in the body. The pain went away, the weight of the pack went away, and I went on for 30 kilometers to the point when I arrived in Banff. It was as though the dial had to be turned back. I came back into my body, and then I felt the pain in my legs. It was painful to sit down. It was painful to stand up. And I, at that point, thought that this mind is powerful enough to drive the body to complete exhaustion. It was really interesting. The second thing that I learned, lesson I learned, was that we fear animals and critters more than we have to. People told me about the ticks on the prairies and the bears and the deer and everything, and I was honestly a little bit nervous. I especially remember when I was camping in the White Shell area of Manitoba, which is right when the Canadian Shield starts. Put my tent into the bush beside the highway, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to a noise like this. What's going on here? I had no idea what this was. So I rolled over and went, I could hear feet going away to a distance, stop. It stopped again, and further away, and then again, till it disappeared. And I surmised what it was. It was a buck, and I was in his territory. He was wondering what I was, or didn't really like me being there. And this happened over and over again, all the way through. The last time I heard it was in New Brunswick, right near Fredericton. At that point, I was completely comfortable. I made my peace with the bucks, and I actually recorded the buck snorting at me while I was in my tent. The third lesson I learned has to do with freedom. My topics tend to be about freedom, and I realized that freedom has a limit. And the limit of freedom is the extent that we can control something. And this became very clear to me because I was in the environment. I had no control over the storm clouds that were coming in. And what I had to do was realize that I only had control over what I could do about it. And so I arranged my backpack in such a way that I had access, in that example, to my rain gear really quickly. I wore my poncho up here, which covers myself and the pack. And I had my rain pants in the back, which I can unclip without taking anything off, and gear up in my rain gear within seconds. And same going in reverse. I learned a lot about that. It was very important to distinguish, and rather than fret about things I can't control. Forces of nature, some of those are human beings as well. In conclusion, then, I would say that there are many lessons that can be learned through anything we do, and especially on this walk, I've learned the power of the mind in reference to the body. I've learned that animals are not as fearful, or we don't have to be as fearful as we think we are. And finally, that freedom has its limits.